Okay, so today we're going to unpack this pretty wild story of how London went from, drab to fab in basically the blink of an eye. Like imagine a world where your best thing, your most prized possession is a really good coat.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like 20 years old
Wow.
or older, and you're patching it up.
Right.
You're taking really good care of it because new clothes are a luxury,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
This is post-World War II Britain.
Yeah.
We're talking rationing,
Yeah.
which means, limited fabrics, muted colors. Everything's about practicality. It was the era of, quote, make do and mend.
Yeah, yeah.
But then, get this, just 2 decades later, London's the global fashion capital.
Right.
It's this whirlwind of color and, totally cutting-edge designs. So today we're doing a deep dive into this, sartorial revolution.
Yeah, I love it.
And we're going to be using the Rest is History podcast as our guide.
Awesome.
So we're going to trace the evolution of men's and women's fashion. We'll start in the 40s, go to the mid-60s, and we'll be exploring the influences, the key players, and the big cultural shifts that fueled this huge transformation.
So what's really striking is how this fashion revolution, it wasn't just changing, hemlines or, the trendy things. This actually mirrored all these super profound social and economic shifts that were happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Think about it. The war years, had a massive impact, not only on obviously what people wore,
Right.
but also their whole mindset towards clothes in general.
Totally. And our source, The Rest is History, does a fantastic job of taking us back to those, those monochrome post-war years.
Yeah.
You had a limited wardrobe, maybe 7 dresses, a couple suits, a few pairs of shoes.
Right.
And a good coat. Well, that was an investment. I mean, you'd have it for decades.
Yeah. It wasn't even just the cost. It was just the practicality, right?
Right.
A lot of people worked in factories or, manual labor jobs. So you needed durable clothing, darker colors, with all the smoke and stuff, all those environments.
Sure, so.
And then, of course, the rationing just made things even more restricted.
Right.
It really reinforced this idea that it was all about practicality. You know what I mean? Style was just not the priority.
Yeah. I mean, they even mentioned specific limitations in the podcast, no double cuffs on shirts for men.
Oh, wow.
No turn-ups on trousers.
Wow.
Only 3 buttons allowed on a garment.
That's so specific.
It's crazy how these, wartime necessities actually dictated even the smallest details of what people wore.
It really shows you how clothing reflect what's happening at a specific time.
Totally.
And it makes the whole explosion of color and style in the 60s even more dramatic.
Right.
It was this burst of pent-up creativity.
Yeah.
A total rejection of all that austerity.
Totally, yeah. And this is where Paris enters the picture. Right?
Yeah.
So while Britain was still recovering from the war, Christian Dior's new look hits the scene in 1947.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, this wasn't about being practical. This was about glamour.
Right.
We're talking, voluptuous silhouettes, luxurious fabrics, like a complete 180 from that wartime aesthetic.
You're totally right. Dior's new look wasn't just about, what you wore. It was a symbol of, Europe being reborn.
Mm-hmm.
It was about escapism after this horrific war. Imagine, full skirts, nipped in waist, all these amazing fabrics. It was this fantasy of abundance and beauty,
Yeah.
And it resonated with people who were desperate for something new and hopeful after all those years of hardship.
It's really interesting how, the new look drew inspiration from the Edwardian era.
Right.
It's almost foreshadowing this trend of reinterpreting the past that would become even bigger in the 60s.
Yeah.
It's fashion was searching for, I don't know, a sense of continuity and optimism.
Yeah.
By revisiting these earlier styles.
Totally.
Yeah.
And we can't forget about America.
Right?
America had a big influence too, especially through Hollywood and those biker films.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where we see teenagers becoming a real consumer group.
Right.
With their own tastes in fashion.
Right.
And they wanted to dress their idols on screen.
Right. Right. So this brings us to the Teddy Boys.
Yeah, yeah.
Those, rebellious kids of the mid-50s.
Yep.
Who kind of shook things up with their Edwardian-inspired looks.
Mm-hmm.
Think, long jackets with the velvet collars, the brocade waistcoats, and the drainpipe trousers.
Yeah.
Yeah, a total 180 from the austerity of the post-war years.
Oh yeah, the Teddy Boys, they really freaked out the older generation.
I bet.
All that flashy style, their spending habits.
Right.
It was seen as this like threat to social norms, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
The rest is history. They even mention a description of Teddy Boy clothes.
Oh.
They were called gay dog clothes, which, suggests that anxieties about changing gender roles and sexuality might have been tied into how people perceived fashion.
That's so interesting. Like, it makes you wonder, were these anxieties purely about, like, homosexuality?
Yeah.
Or were they also, like, rooted in a more general fear of changing gender roles? Like, the erosion of traditional masculinity.
Yeah.
It seems like fashion's often this lightning rod for those kinds of, like, societal anxieties.
You're so right. I mean, fashion can be such a powerful indicator of, cultural shifts and anxieties.
Right.
And then you have the mods, coming in as this contrast to the Teddy Boys.
Right.
With their sharp Italian suits, their love of scooters, and
Yeah.
their obsession with all the details.
Right. The mods were like a different kind of rebellion.
Totally.
Like, they were all about style and, like, sophistication.
Yeah.
Their look was, like, precision and control. Maybe reflecting this desire for, like, order and modernity
Yeah.
in this, like, rapidly changing world.
Totally.
It's really fascinating to, like, compare them with the rockers,
Oh, yeah.
who had that, like, a more rugged American-inspired look,
Yeah.
and that clash between those two subcultures.
Yeah.
It really became, like, symbolic of this larger cultural divide in British society.
For sure. It shows how fashion can be a powerful way to express identity.
Yeah,
Belonging and even, rebellion.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just about the guys.
Oh, right.
Like, teenage girls were becoming, like, this major force in the fashion world
Yeah.
with, like, serious economic power.
Yeah.
And they were, like, driving trends.
Absolutely. And that's where Mary Quant comes in.
Yes.
Often called the mother of the miniskirt.
Right.
Quant's designs, they were revolutionary.
Yeah.
They were playful, youthful, and androgynous even.
Mm-hmm.
They drew inspiration from children's clothing,
Huh.
which challenged traditional ideas about femininity.
Yeah.
Her boutique on the King's Road in London,
Right.
it became like a mecca for anyone looking for the latest trends.
Yeah.
And her use of shorter hemlines, the playful patterns, the unexpected fabrics like gingham and tartan, that helped usher in this more youthful and androgynous look for women. It was like a radical change from the more formal, more restrictive styles of the past.
It's amazing how those things, those shorter skirts, the playful patterns, all the different fabrics,
Yeah.
it's like it all reflected this changing attitude towards what it meant to be feminine.
Right.
It was about embracing a style that was more useful, more carefree.
Absolutely. And Quant's success was part of this bigger shift in the whole fashion landscape, like the rise of all these independent boutiques. They played a huge role in spreading the new styles, offering a much more accessible and informal shopping experience than those big department stores.
Yeah, these boutiques weren't just about selling clothes.
Right.
They were
Yeah.
creating a whole new shopping experience.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. It was more personal, more informal,
Yeah.
and like more in tune with what the younger generation wanted.
Exactly. They were key to the democratization of fashion. They made the latest styles available to, like, everyone.
Right, right. And this all coincided with this, like, revolution in fashion media, too,
Oh, yeah.
right? Television, magazines, photography, they were all shaping trends and creating all this buzz around the new looks.
Absolutely. I mean, we can't downplay how important those glossy magazines were.
Right.
Television was still new, but magazines, I mean, they were everywhere.
Yeah.
Titles like Honey, they were aimed specifically at teenage girls,
Mm-hmm.
and they fed that desire for the newest fashions, the beauty trends.
Yeah, yeah. Like, they were, like, selling this whole lifestyle.
They were. They weren't just showing clothes.
Right.
They were promoting a vision of what it meant to be a modern young woman.
Yeah.
Stylish, independent, confident,
Mhm.
and they like cleverly connected fashion to like aspirations of moving up in the world, of finding romantic success.
Right. It's like they were creating a whole new world for these young women to like dream about.
Totally.
And photography was becoming like a key part of that world.
Yeah.
You know, photographers like David Bailey, Terrence Donovan, Brian Duffy,
Oh, yeah.
they elevated fashion photography to like an art form.
Mm-hmm.
They were capturing this energy, this dynamism of the 60s.
And it's amazing how those photographers like became celebrities themselves.
I know.
You know, they were seen as cool, rebellious, super talented.
Mm,
So it really blurred the lines between fashion, art, and pop culture.
totally.
And then, of course, you have the color supplements
Right.
in the newspapers,
Yeah.
like the Sunday Times, right?
Yeah,
It was a visual feast.
it was.
They were bringing the world of fashion to life and in full color,
Right.
which, you know, black and white photos just couldn't do.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine now, but those color supplements, they were revolutionary.
Yeah.
They were like a window into this world of like glamour and excitement.
Mm-hmm.
And at the heart of it all, you have Jean Shrimpton, the
Yes.
supermodel, who like epitomized the 60s look.
Absolutely.
She was tall, slender, effortlessly stylish.
Mm-hmm.
She like perfectly embodied this youthful energy of that time.
And her rise to fame coincided with, you know, the peak of Mary Quant's influence.
Right.
And she became like the face of the Quant aesthetic. You know, she was on magazine covers, fashion spreads,
Right.
and she helped to popularize those designs globally.
Her story really captures the spirit of this whole era.
Totally.
You know, London was just exploding with creativity, pushing the boundaries of fashion.
Yeah.
And speaking of Shrimpton, there's this wild anecdote about her trip to Melbourne
Okay.
for the Derby in 1965.
Mm.
Apparently what she wore caused a huge stir, not just in Australia,
Oh, wow.
like internationally. So we'll have to wait till the next part to hear what happened.
It's a good cliffhanger. It makes you wonder, you know, how could one outfit have such a huge impact,
Right.
especially at a time when social norms were already being challenged by this fashion revolution?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we left off with Jean Shrimpton's infamous trip to the Melbourne Derby in 1965. Like, what exactly did she wear that caused this, like, huge commotion?
Well, the podcast hosts, they described it as this landmark moment, like something that actually like messed with Anglo-Australian relations.
Really?
Yeah. So Shrimpton shows up at the races
Right.
in a white shift dress. It was designed by Colin Rolfe. And, you know, a white dress on its own, that might not seem like a big deal. But
Yeah.
the hemline, that was the real shocker.
Okay, so how short was it?
It was a full 5 inches above her knees.
Wow.
Yeah.
So why was that, like, so scandalous? Like, what was it about that specific length that caused, like, such an uproar?
Well, think about it. 1965, 5 inches above the knee. I mean, that was considered really, really short, especially for a formal event like the Derby.
Right.
But it wasn't just the hemline, right? She also decided not to wear stockings or a hat.
Oh, wow.
And like both of those, they were considered like essential for an occasion like that.
I see.
So the Australian press, they had a field day with this,
I bet.
criticizing her for disrespecting their traditions.
So it was like the whole ensemble, the bare legs, the lack of hat. It was like a total departure from what people expected.
Right.
And like pretty bold statement for a young woman to make.
Exactly. And you know what? This seemingly small act of rebellion, it actually says a lot about how much society was changing in the 60s.
Yeah.
Like, we were talking about how fashion reflected this growing sense of, like, youthfulness, individuality, and this rejection of all those stuffy conventions.
Right.
And Shrimpton, whether she meant to or not, became this, like, symbol of that shift. You know, her derby outfit, it was a visual representation of these changing attitudes.
Yeah. And her derby appearance, it also solidified London's position as like a global trendsetter.
Totally.
You know, you have a British model wearing a British design dress, and she sets off this fashion controversy on the other side of the world.
It shows you how much influence London had in the fashion world at that point.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about, you know, high fashion. Mary Quant and those independent boutiques, they were making a huge impact on the streets.
Right. Quant's designs with all that like youthful energy and the playful use of color and pattern, they were becoming super popular among young women.
Yeah, those boutiques were like the perfect space for this new aesthetic to thrive
Yeah.
and reach a wider audience.
Right.
You know, they offered this completely different shopping experience.
Yeah.
It was more personal, you know, more informal and like more in line with what young people wanted. They played a vital role in making fashion more democratic, making those cutting-edge styles more accessible.
Totally.
Hmm.
And we have to talk about the role of media in all this, too.
Yeah.
Magazines like Honey, they were constantly pushing the latest trends.
Right.
And creating this sense of urgency around fashion.
Yeah, those glossy magazines, they were more than just like fashion catalogs. They were selling a whole lifestyle.
Right.
Aspiration. They presented this image of a modern young woman who was stylish, independent, and confident. And they really cleverly connected fashion to ideas of social mobility and success.
It's like they were creating a whole new world for these young women to, like, aspire to.
Totally. And then, of course, you had the color supplements in the newspapers, like the Sunday Times.
Yeah, those were amazing.
Right. They brought all these trends to life in a way that black and white photos just couldn't.
Yeah.
They made fashion feel more like immediate, more vibrant, more something to really want.
Right.
Those supplements were like a window into a world of like glamour and excitement.
Totally.
They showed off the work of talented photographers like, David Bailey and Terrence Donovan. Right. And they turned models like Jean Shrimpton into like icons.
It's hard to overstate the impact of those images.
Right.
They weren't just influencing fashion, they were shaping a whole lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
They were promoting this vision of the 60s as a time of freedom, creativity, and like youthful rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
But this shift from, wartime austerity to a culture obsessed with youth and the new, it raises a big question.
Yeah.
Like, how did a society that once valued, like having clothes that lasted, that were practical,
Right.
how did it become so obsessed with like disposability and this constant chase for trends?
The podcast host asks, how did that happen? How did we go from make do and men to like constantly needing the newest thing?
That's a really good question. Like, what factors contributed to that shift?
Well, it was probably a bunch of things, right? The post-war economic boom, that definitely played a role.
Right.
People had more money to spend, more freedom to like experiment with their style.
So like as the economy improved, people had more money for clothes.
Exactly.
And they were like more willing to try new things.
Yeah, but there was also like this cultural shift toward individualism. This desire to like express yourself through your style. Right. And to break away from all that conformity of the past.
It's like fashion became a way for people to show their individuality.
Totally.
And like reject those more restrictive norms of the past.
And technology played a part too, right?
Yeah.
New fabrics, new manufacturing processes, made clothes cheaper and like way more available.
Right.
It was this whole convergence of economic, cultural, and technological forces that fueled this like explosion of creativity and basically redefined what fashion meant.
And this revolution wasn't just limited to clothes, right? It went beyond that.
Oh, yeah.
To music, art, even attitudes towards social norms. It was this massive transformation.
The 60s were a time of rapid change and experimentation, and fashion, it reflected those changes. And in some ways, it kind of drove them too. It's amazing how something as like seemingly superficial as clothes can have such a huge impact on society.
It shows you the power of fashion to like express cultural values and to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
But our journey through this fashion revolution, it isn't over yet. We still have more to cover. So are you ready to delve further into like the heart of swinging London? All right, so we've gone from like post-war, making do and mending to the miniskirt to supermodels. But let's dig a little deeper into those cultural forces, right? The things that really fueled this fashion explosion. Like, what was it about the 60s that made fashion such a powerful way to push for change?
Well, remember how we were talking about teenagers like becoming this like whole new consumer group? That was huge, like seismic impact on the whole fashion industry. You had all these young people, suddenly they had money to spend and they wanted to express themselves like their new freedom through their clothes.
So like marketers, they caught on to this pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Right. They started targeting teens with magazines, TV shows, all those ad campaigns.
Yeah.
Like they were talking directly to what these kids wanted, what they were dreaming of.
Exactly. It wasn't just about selling them a shirt or a dress.
Right.
It was like selling them a whole lifestyle. They were presenting this vision of like youth being this time for rebellion, trying new things, figuring yourself out.
Right.
And fashion, it was like a key part of that whole world.
So it wasn't just about hemlines, right, or hairstyles. This was like a reflection of bigger changes in society.
Absolutely.
The rise of youth culture, the growing economic power of women, and like this shifting attitude towards authority, tradition, all of it.
Exactly. Fashion became this like battleground for these values that were changing. Like the older generation, they saw these new styles and they were like, this is disrespectful. This
Right.
is like a sign of moral decline, you know?
What is the world coming to?
Exactly. But for younger people, these new styles, they were all about liberation.
Mm.
They were rejecting those stuffy conventions of the past, embracing a more expressive, more individualistic way of dressing.
It's wild how something like seemingly as simple as clothes could become this like symbol of generational conflict.
It is. And it reminds us that fashion, it's never just about the clothes. It's about how we see ourselves and how we see the world around us.
It's true.
Yeah.
And it's worth pointing out, like, this fashion revolution, it wasn't like contained to London.
Right.
It spread everywhere,
Globally.
impacting music, art, even attitudes toward, gender and sexuality.
The 60s were a time of massive change, massive experimentation.
Yeah.
And the impact of that era, we're still feeling it today. Like the iconic looks from back then, the miniskirt, the mod suit. I mean, designers are still inspired by them.
Yeah.
Fashion lovers, too.
It speaks to like the staying power of that era.
Totally.
When London, it became like the epicenter of this global fashion revolution.
Yeah.
So looking back at all of this, what are some like key takeaways for you?
I think for me, it's realizing that fashion, it's so much more than just fabrics and trends. It's how people express themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It reflects cultural values, and it can even be a catalyst for social change.
I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that what we wear, it can have meaning, and those choices, they can be a powerful way to communicate who we are and to like challenge the way things are.
The fashion revolution of the 60s, it shows us that clothing can be this powerful tool for change, a way to like break free from the past and make new rules.
So the next time you see like a miniskirt
Yeah.
or a sharp mod suit,
Yeah.
Remember, it's not just a garment.
Right.
It's a piece of history.
It is.
It's like a snapshot of this moment when fashion became this force for change, a symbol of a whole generation wanting to break free and change the world.
And who knows, maybe historians in the future will look back at what we're wearing now with that same like fascination and wonder.
That's a good point.
The story of fashion, it never stops. It's always evolving, reflecting, and shaping the world around us.
This has been such a fascinating look at how fashion has changed.
It has.
We've uncovered how a society that once valued practicality and long-lasting clothes became, captivated by this desire for the new. We've seen how fashion became this like battleground for what different generations valued.
Yeah.
And how it became such a powerful way to express who you are.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, just remember, fashion, it's a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
It reflects our stories, both individually and collectively. It's a language that tells us who we are and who we want to be. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into this amazing world of fashion.
Couldn't have said it better myself.